I'm Dean Greg Cant, and this is my Instagram live session. I'm thrilled to be the Dean of the Feliciano School of Business, New Jersey's most innovative business school, and I think I'm the first Dean who's done a session like this. So let's look for some questions.
Okay, so your first question is going to be, where did you go to college?
The question is, where did I go to college? So some of you might have already guessed that I maybe didn't go to college in New Jersey. I did my initial undergraduate degree at the University of Western Australia, which is in Australia. I did my master's degree at Queen's University, which is on Ontario, Canada, and a little north of us here. Then I went back to the University of Western Australia and did my PhD.
Okay, second question, what did you major in?
So university study in Australia is a little different than it is in the US. Australia uses essentially a British system of higher education. So my degree, undergraduate degrees in Australia, are 3 years, not 4 years, and there is no Gen Ed. So really you just study the major you did. And I started actually in economics, but ended up converting over to focus mainly on labour relations. So I did that as an undergraduate student. I actually did a master's in labour relations, or industrial relations it's called in Australia, and then went and did a PhD back in Australia. And again, unlike the US, PhDs, even though you study discrete areas, all PhDs are called the same thing. It's a doctorate in philosophy. It's not as separated as it is in this country.
Okay, next question. What are the positives and negatives of the education system in Australia versus the education system in America?
So the question is, what are the positives and negatives of my experience in higher education in Australia versus the US system? Let's start with an undergraduate. There's actually substantial differences. I mentioned, for starters, in the US it's a 4-year undergraduate degree, and for much of the rest of the world it's a 3-year degree. And there's no general education, or in some institutions we call that the liberal arts core. So in Australia you just study essentially your major. And why I hadn't appreciated that model before we moved to the US, I've become completely supportive of the notion of general education. If education is essential to the kind of informed citizenry that is achieved through higher education, then a general education which introduces you to things that you weren't imagining you were going to study. So you might come and think, I'm going to be a scientist, I'm going to be an accountant, and you're going to be obligated to look at everything from history to philosophy to all sorts of different things that make you a more well-rounded individual. So I've become a complete fan of 4-year undergraduates where approximately half of what you do is outside what you're prepared to do. The other part that's really different, and to be fair, I graduated 25 years ago, and I imagine things may be a little different, but at an undergraduate level, when I studied, and even when I taught in Australia, I had courses in some cases that went for a whole year. So while we had semesters, the course lasted a whole year, and in some cases there was just one exam at the end. Now, when I first started teaching in the US, and I only had one exam at the end of the semester, my students were all upset with me because they wanted multiple points of assessment. And I'll be honest, it took me a little time to fully appreciate why I want to do that. And I had my first midterm exam when I was a young professor in Washington State, because I was used to doing assignments during the semester, then having a comprehensive exam at the end. Now, the upside of that is that if you did well in the exam, you typically did well for the whole course, but they were 3 hours long, and by the end of it, literally your hand ached because you'd written so much. And in hindsight, I don't think that's necessarily a particularly good way to learn, and what it meant is, to succeed, you had to be a good exam taker. And our job in higher education is not to make you a good exam taker, it's to prepare you for the kind of dynamic world that you inherit. So while I just was used to it in the environment of these large exams, I'm convinced that our approach to learning is better, And to be fair, I'm sure my colleagues in Australia have changed at some level their approach, but this idea of continuous learning, of continually assessing where we are, of more hands-on applied learning, I find an essential, the essential model underpinning the North American experience of higher ed, and I just think it's better for students.
So I have a live question from Ash. How can business students become more involved, and what clubs are being offered in the business school?
So the question is, how can you become more involved, and what kind of clubs do we have in the business school? So Ash, you're right that it is important not just to see education as something you rock into class, why those classes are important. The whole experience of college is critical. That's the extracurricular things outside the college, and I'd encourage you as a student of ours to participate in all sorts of different activities, from sports to social activities, join student government, all sorts of different things. Within the Feliciano School of Business, we do have a range of different student clubs, and mostly they're associated really with discipline areas. So the accountants have a club, economics, management, marketing, HR, so on. For a full list, I think you can go onto our website and see what is actually an ever-growing. I think there's a couple of new clubs, for example, started this year. So club involvement's important, and there are some general clubs, but often they're actually clubs associated with a discipline area, so once you've decided to focus on a particular area. But getting involved means participating. You only involve when you say yes. The greatest disappointment students have sometimes is they get to the end of their degree, they think, well, I graduated, I got grades, but boy, I wish I had done X. And X is often, I should have got more involved. I should have said yes when someone said, do you want to participate in this? I should have put my hand up. Not putting your hand up is the one thing that will draw back your career opportunities. You've got to be the volunteer. And I don't mean the kind of pushy choose me, but when there is a project, when someone says I'm looking for volunteers, put your hand up.
So another live question from Simple Darren. What do you consider to be a successful student who graduates from the business school?
So the question is, what do I see as a successful student graduating from the business school? Well, first and foremost, what makes a student successful, frankly, is what they think successful. But if I'm generalising, really that's saying, what are we hoping for you as a student? So we see the process of, especially through that 4 years as an undergraduate, as a maturation process. So you're actually growing older, so you are older and wiser, and also you've got skills and competencies and confidence that you didn't have before. So what happens early in your professional career, those first jobs you get are not the last jobs you get. But what we hope is that wherever you land, whether it's a Big Four accounting firm, whether it's a major government agency, whether it's a small startup firm, whether you start your own business, what you're doing is you're able to make an impact. So what a good education does is prepares you to make an impact. So someone wants to employ you is important, but wherever you end up, what people say is, boy, you being here has made a difference in our organisation. You've brought a new sense of purpose. You've got some competencies. We rely on you. So as a parent, what you hope is when you come to college, I get a nice job on the other side, and we never underestimate how important that is. But wherever you end up working, we want you to make a difference in that environment. And that's personal. For some of you, that is working in the not-for-profit sector, doing something you're passionate about. And for others, you're saying, I want to make a chunk of change. I want a high-paid job. I'm willing to work very hard, and I want to see runs on the board in my career early. Whatever your passion's going to be, we want to help you succeed.
So next live question, how does the business school help recent graduates in finding a job?
So we have the McColgan Center, which does really two important areas. One is it helps in terms of advising that keeps you on track, make sure you're ready to graduate. And the other part of what they do is really career placement. And that career placement is helping get that internship, get the kind of job that launches your career. So we do job fairs, and we do a whole lot of activities that are designed very clearly to help you find out what's expected from employers, put you in contact with employers, And in some cases, this is internships leading to employment. But one way or another, we have a group of folk who are dedicated to giving you that launch pad career option. Now, it isn't a matter of sit back and say, all right, bring me the job. You're a partner in that. But it's a key part of what we do is help you explore what those possibilities are and line up the interviews and even prepare you for the interviews so that you're likely to succeed.
Okay, so we're going to go back to questions submitted through an email, and it asks, how did you become the Dean of the Feliciano School of Business?
So the question is, how did I become the Dean? And to be fair, this is a job, so I applied for a job. Now, I was a Dean of another institution in Minnesota, and I'd done that position for 7 years. I was the founding Dean, so I created a business school. I had a lot of fun, really enjoyed it, but purely for personal and professional reasons, I was looking for something new, a new opportunity, quite interested in this part of the country. It probably shouldn't surprise people. I didn't actually know Montclair State before I was looking around. I saw the position, it sounded interesting, and so I was an applicant for a job. I just happened to be the successful applicant for a job. So they didn't know me and I didn't know them, but lots of good things happen without needing to have had a deep connection ahead of time.
Following up that question, what are some of your job responsibilities?
So how it works in higher education, we're similar to institutions across the board. The kind of structure of institutions is the key part of what higher ed's about is what we call academic affairs. So that's the academic programs. And those academic programs are led by a provost, that's the person I report to, and then there's colleges or schools, and we're called a school, but we could equally be called a college. So at Montclair, for example, we have the College of Science and Mathematics as one of the other colleges. We're actually as big as colleges, but we use the word school for some quirky reasons about business schools. But we're an academic unit. So within that, and I'm the leader of that academic unit. And within that academic unit, we have a little over 100 full-time faculty. We have about 35 full-time staff. If you add in our student employees and our a range of adjunct faculty, we have about 260 people who work for us. And my responsibilities are essentially about leading that group. So there's the operational questions of leading a group, but then the broader responsibilities of leadership within the institution. So I do a lot with my fellow deans, the provost and the president, and I'm the head of this unit. There's lots of people who take clear responsibility for that, but deans are an unusual position. Sometimes they act like mini presidents, sometimes they're cheerleaders, often their central goal is making sure the resources are there for the hard-working people inside their unit to achieve the necessary goals.
Okay, another live question. How do you plan on connecting more with business students?
So there's a number of the question is, how do I plan to connect more with business students? So I'm really in the early stages of my third year here. And when you first start, you don't actually know where everything is. So you get away with you get away with nearly everything. But the more time I've been here, there's a bunch of things that become progressively important. A real important thing for us, frankly, is raising money, getting the resources we need. And the one area that I haven't personally given as much attention as I should is connecting directly to business students. And this year, one of the things I'm doing is more directly meeting with students who run our student clubs. We have about 3,400 students. That's a lot of students. There isn't a practical way for me to have meaningful relationships with a group that large. So part of how I personally, as the dean, can connect is saying, all right, who's the representatives I can work with? Who are the kind of voices I need to listen to? So a starting point is the student clubs, because they do represent a large number of students. I try and meet with groups. I meet, for example, with graduate students when they start. I'm involved in various times in the graduate process. I actually took a a group of students away on one of our MBA trips. But the larger we get and the more complex we get, it is difficult for me as the dean to really be in touch with individual students, which is an important reason why we're doing this very event today. So we're proud that we believe we're the first business school to do this, and this is a deliberate attempt to give a chance for direct connections between me as your dean and students, because I think virtually none of you know me. We don't typically come in contact with each other. So if this works as an idea, we're going to continue to find ways for me to listen and answer questions, take up things that are important to you as students.
Another live question. What's your 5-year plan as the dean?
So the 5-year plan, so as I said, this is sort of the beginning of my 3rd year. So part of the early plan is, make sure I can find my way around. And part of my plan essentially is the university's plan. And then the other factors that shape what we do is things that I don't control. One of the most profound changes that's happened since I've been here, first of all, my first day was the day we moved into our building. Some of you will remember our old building, some won't. Our old building was complete rubbish. There was nothing good about it, not a single redeeming feature. We have an incredible facility. So part of our plan is to continue to leverage that, to use the capacity of our building to enrich the student experience. Another thing that's happened in this last couple of years is a massive growth in our student numbers. In fact, well over 1,000 students have been added in that period of time, and I expect those numbers to continue to grow. I would not be surprised if we're not at 4,000 students within a few years' time. Now that, whether you call that a goal, it's going to be part of our reality. So it's an essential thing for me is to make sure that as we get to be a substantial sized business school, and we're already in maybe the top 5% of business schools by size, is that we provide an outstanding education, not just a big group. Because the danger of large programs is they flow back to the middle. So yes, there's lots of students, but it tends to be very vanilla in what we offer. So my goal is an outstanding program. It will continue to grow at an undergraduate and a graduate level. And as we do that, we want to add lots of bells and whistles. In other words, not just the things that you expect, but lots of elements that have a wow factor for you as a student that give you the opportunities, whether it's better placement of students, whether it's strengthening the curriculum itself, whether it's new programs. We just want fantastic opportunities for students.
Okay, another live question. Will the business school ever offer an Excel certification program?
Actually, Excel, that's an interesting question. The question is, will we ever offer an Excel certified program? On one level, that for people who haven't thought about it, that actually is a genuinely good idea. Excel is used across the board in all sorts of different ways, and we do expect students to have Excel skills, and it would be conceivable for us to ensure that by making sure if you don't have those skills in advance, we offer it. So that's something that I will take up to make sure. We hope students are getting Excel skills. It is plausible though for us to have it as part of a standard curriculum or some kind of add-on where we'll certify that you have the skills, especially, hopefully everyone has some basic Excel, but there's a lot of, use of Excel that most people don't do. In other words, a more powerful tool than most people understand. And if you can use those, they'll be handy in the workplace. So that could be something that we explore.
The next question will be, do you anticipate offering any additional student-based contests, such as the pitch competition or Times Square Challenge?
So the question is, do we intend to offer any more student-based competitions? And two that were mentioned was the Times Square Challenge and the pitch competition. Let me quickly talk about those two. So the Times Square Challenge was an outstanding opportunity, but it was in lots of ways a one-off because it was a result of a generous gift by Mimi Feliciano, who basically got who bid on and won this opportunity for using a billboard in Times Square. And we set up a challenge with a group of students. Started with lots of students, got down to a tight group who came up with an amazing product which then was displayed in one of the most highly trafficked spaces in the world for a period of time for 30-second slots. And we'd like to be able to do that all the time, but we would never be able to afford it. I don't even know what it would have cost to actually buy that exposure. But what we will do is, if anything happens on that kind of line, if something falls to us, we're going to figure out a way to involve students in it. The second one that was mentioned is the pitch competition. So we've had the pitch competition now for about 4 years. Very soon I hope to be able to announce that we've, through the support of the principal donor who's been doing up to this point, really add deeply some resources into that pitch competition with much larger prizes. Not quite ready to announce it, but when we do, people are going to go, wow, that is amazing. So it's the same essential model, but by larger prizes and a number of other things around it, we'll create a program unlike any other school that looks like us. There are certainly some of the Columbia's, NYU's who have these hundreds of thousands of dollar prizes, and to be fair, they're in a different kind of category than us. But a school that looks like Montclair, no one is going to have what we're having in terms of that model. Other ways that we like students to compete. First of all, when I met with the student groups within the last couple of weeks, I indicated that as part of this year's budget cycle, I've put money aside so that our students can compete in other people's competitions. Because while we like to set our own competitions up, we like you to succeed and take someone else's money. So what I'm working with the clubs now is to say, all right, there's lots of ways you can compete all across the country, regionally, nationally, there's competitions that you would be credible in. Put a team together and we'll find ways to help and support that. So to a general answer to the question is yes, we're going to find new ways for competitions inside the organisation, but we think you're very credible to go and take someone else's prize. So whether that's a regional or national competition, like happens in marketing or in human resource management, or compete for the kind of prizes where you're going to win the money. Because our students have done that in the past, often on their own dime. We're going to find ways to support them doing that now, and it's good for them, and to be honest, it's good for us.
Okay, another live question. Is the business school planning on offering specific master programs and not just MBA programs with concentrations?
So the question is, are we intending to offer specialised master's programs? Now, first of all, we do already, and we've just added a new one this year. So you're right that our largest single program has been our MBA, although within the MBA we have a number of options, including starting this last year, a fully online MBA, we have an executive MBA, a hybrid MBA, etc. And in a quite short time, we'll be offering a full-time option in the MBA as well. But we've had an MS in accounting for a number of years, and that continues to be a strong program that's used by accounting students to prepare them to sit the CPA exam. It satisfies the 150 credits. And this fall, we started the new MS in data analytics, again a brand new master's program. Started from scratch, and we had enough students to get a good viable first year cohort together. We've also offered a range of new graduate certificate programs, and if you think about the marketplace of degrees, there's the 4-year undergraduate degree and a typical master's that you know. There's also, in terms of the specialised education, really strong demand, we believe, for graduate certificates. And we have a number that we've started already, and within the next year or so, I think there'll be maybe 6 graduate certificates, and each of the ones we've launched have had very strong growth. Examples of those include human resource management, project management. There's a graduate certificate in data analytics and in accounting, but we're rolling them out in sales and in some other areas, digital marketing and so on, in the next year or so.
Another live question. Is the Feliciano School of Business going to add PhD programs?
So the next question is, are we going to add PhD programs? So not immediately, but in the midterm, our goal will be to add some doctoral study. So you may not be familiar with this, but the Montclair State recently had its status changed to be a doctoral serving public institution. Now, for a number of you, that don't care either way, but in higher education, that's a pretty big deal. There's actually only a handful of institutions in New Jersey that fit into that category, and the university does offer a number of doctoral programs. So there's some not insignificant resource questions about what it takes to offer a doctorate, and when we do eventually offer a doctorate, it's likely to be in a specialised area, and it'll be focused on the market needs. And by that I mean an example is there's lots of good doctorates in in economics, lots of them, and they're the best in the world, and it would make no sense for us to try and do a doctorate in economics, even though we have good economics faculty. If anything, there's almost an oversupply. But there are some other areas, and accounting is a good example, is this country does not generate enough PhDs in accounting to satisfy our needs. So if you're developing a program, first look at where the need is, and then says, can we really satisfy that need? So to simplify the answer, at some stage in the not too distant future, we've certainly been considering it for a period of time, and I expect one day we'll have at least one doctoral program.
Okay, last question. Would you ever consider doing monthly reports and updates through email, perhaps?
The question is, would I consider doing monthly reports through email? I certainly am very happy to do reports. The real question in reports is, what's the best method to use, and why I answer emails. I'm not sure how many people read emails, so it won't be my concern about monthly reports. The issue I'll ask my people to look at is, what would be the best way to get information out that you will bother to read? We're experimenting with this because it's direct. You ask a question, I try and answer the question. If we could be certain that people value feedback, and the other issue is monthly the right time, but I'm more than happy to find ways to share with the student body, my students in my school, what we're doing, what we think is important to you. And if we know that a particular avenue is the best way to do that, it's probably not going to be Twitter. And by that I mean, I'm not sure what I can tell you in 140 characters. And if there was emails that we could figure out that you'd want to read, then by all means. We want to share, we want transparency, we want you to know what's happening.
Okay, what's the biggest difference between Australian students and students in Montclair State? Are students all the same everywhere?
So the question is, are students the same everywhere, as Australian students different than Montclair State? So in being honest about it, no one's the same anywhere, and yet there's also similarities. So I've been fortunate to live and work in lots of parts of the world. In fact, I just got back 2 days ago from spending about 11 days in China, visiting a number of partner institutions that we have. And over the years, we've had lots of Chinese students come from those partner institutions here. And there are similarities about the life experience of that age group if you've grown up in China versus here, but also there's frankly fundamental differences, cultural differences, worldview differences. The educational experience in China, for example, is very different. So it's also within the US, the experience of coming to Montclair is different than the experience of going to Harvard. And that's not just because the students, the demographics and the differences in students, the kind of experience of a small elite university environment. In our state, a little south of us, is Princeton. And Princeton often ranks as the best institution in the world, or the top couple. It has resources we can't even dream of. And it has amongst the most outstanding faculty in $1 billion facilities. And so you've got to expect that the experience of a Princeton student is different. However, at some fundamental levels, hard-working, dedicated Montclair students stack up really well against students from everywhere. I think what makes students here unique is what they bring to the table, but that's shaped by the US culture, it's shaped by the culture of the Mid-Atlantic where we are, etc. So the answer is yes, there's some things that are the same. 19-year-old boys are still interested in the same kind of things 19-year-old boys or girls are interested in. We all want a better life, we want education to make a difference, but the structures of degrees are different. Certainly the teaching style can be different. But we can learn off each other. Why it's great to have international students here is the sharing of insights and advice to each other. We like you to do study abroad. If you do, when you're in another institution, you'll say, wow, there's some pretty big differences, including even what happens in classrooms, how much work you do. Overwhelmingly, when international students come to Montclair, what they say is, boy, you do a lot of work. And by that I mean there's a lot of assignments, there's a lot of activities, more than happens in lots of other countries in how much occurs in the classroom. That's probably not a bad thing. We're teaching you to multitask, to do lots of different things, and to top it off, many of you are working while you're doing that.
Is it true that we offer a Bloomberg certification?
The question is it true that we offer a Bloomberg certification? I think the answer is yes. We do. We have for a little while now. We've got quite a number of Bloomberg terminals, and if I'm recalling correctly, we're adding some Bloomberg terminals this year. Only a few years ago we had like 3, and we'll be frank, they're not inexpensive. They cost the university quite a lot of money each year. We believe they're important. They're used extensively in industry. They are the same terminal, the same data that you will use when you start working. So we're happy to have certification. You're able to do that at your own pace. What's great about it, you can sit here at midnight on Sundays if that works for you and work through and get the certification.
Next question, why don't you teach classes?
So the question is, why don't I teach classes? Now, the flip answer to that is I'm not good enough to teach classes. I'm being a little flip about it, but I haven't taught for many years. And to be fair, by the time you get into my kind of position, I'm an administrator. So we have excellent teachers. Early parts of my career, yes, I did teach classes. At some stages I was a department chair, but I've been a standard academic, which meant my job was to teach classes and do research, do service. I like that. The thing I miss most about not being a traditional professor is I don't get to know students, and I don't get the fun that goes with instruction. Every so often you'll meet deans who have kept more of a classroom environment, but to me you either are fully bought into that and all that goes with being a good instructor, and I spend a lot of time doing other things. For example, as I said, I was out of the country for a week and a half, and that's pretty challenging if you're trying to teach. So I said I'm thrilled with the instructors we have. Certainly being a professor is a great career. One might argue the best career in the world is being a tenured professor. I am actually a professor of this institution. If I wasn't the dean, I would be back in the classroom.
We're going to go over to a personal level. So who is your biggest influence in your life?
So the question is, who is the biggest influence in my life? To be fair, I've had lots of influences over my life. This may be common with lots of other people. The most important influences in my life have actually been my family. I had a father who was a great influence on me. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But I was very fortunate to have a loving family that shaped who I was. So my mother and my father had such a profound impact as I grew up. The choices about the people who I share my life with, to be fair, my wife probably shapes me more than anyone else nowadays. But and at a professional level, I've been fortunate to have some outstanding colleagues. And interestingly, I think you're also shaped by the people who you choose not to be like. This sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but over the years I've had leaders who I've found haven't led in the way that I like, and why that's not a positive contribution. What it really means is, as I think, who am I going to be? I'm saying, among other things, I'm not going to be like that. So there's the kind of positive contributions that people say, boy, that's the role model I want. Their attitude, their approach, their wisdom, and without naming names, there have been key people in my professional life who have shaped me by me saying, the way they lead is not the way I want to lead, and so I'm very deliberately making different sorts of choices.
The next question is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The question is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? I know that's the kind of question we like to ask. The difficulty is, I've received lots of bits of advice. So let me think, and of course, without planning this out, after the fact I'll probably go, damn, I should have said this piece of advice. But most of the advice that shaped who I am, sometimes it's literal advice, so someone but often it's observing other people. So to me, the kind of two ways you really learn is I learn by watching other people and learning from their example, and sometimes physical advice. And I don't know if this is just me, there hasn't been a lot of times that people actually sit you down, except for your parents, and say, son, here's something, the classic advice, the kind of movie advice, where someone says, here's advice, sage advice, listen to me, son. And if that happens, often it actually is hard advice. It's you're trying too hard, you need to give more attention or something. But if I'm stepping back, what are those big points of wisdom that have helped me achieve what I can? Often they go somewhere in kind of two ends of a spectrum. Part of the advice is ensuring that you understand your true north and you live up to those expectations. So advice that gets to who are you, and are you living up to whatever that aspiration, that true north? What's the centre of you, the values, and are you holding yourself to the values? And sometimes that's a very positive process, and sometimes it's the tough call of someone saying, I don't think you're living up to what you aspire to. And both those points have been important in my life. Yes, pat you on the head, I understand who you are and I believe that you're living that up, through to, I think you're better than this. So that kind of advice is very important. And frankly, there's the other advice, which tends to be much more practical, is the advice that helps you focus on the things that are important. One of the things that I've learned most across my career, and I think is critical, is to focus on the important things. The more senior you get in your career, the more strategic you have to act, is you stop sweating the little things. Early in your career, at different stages, sometimes depending on your personality, a tendency to do this, is to worry about little things, to imagine that big things are a product of lots of little things. And I honestly just don't believe that's the case. There's lots of things you need to let slide, focus on what's critical for your success. So there have been people in my life who've really helped me do that. The advice is stop, don't worry about that, worry about the big picture. Yes, things aren't quite going the way you want, but are the big direction, are we achieving the big goals we want? And that's really sage advice.
Okay, next question. What advice would you give to students?
So the question is what advice I'd give to students. And of course, you can give generic advice to anyone, kind of advice. The best advice is tailored advice. So it's, in other words, advice that suits you. But given I don't know you as an individual, the generic advice tends to be the same kinds of things. And let me give, if there's one piece of advice, and in fact I had a conversation with the provost, the head of academic affairs, about this very issue yesterday. And that's a personal view, I think, shaped by my experience and the experience of lots of other people, that the most important thing that will determine your personal and professional success is the resilience. And by resilience, I mean your capacity to get knocked down, to stand up, and to continue to strive. Now, whether that's in personal relationships, because if you have a personal relationship, it won't always work, whether it's professionally, whether it's in a job, wherever it happens to be, resilience as a community, as an individual, is the determinant of success. No one, doesn't matter whose family you've been brought up into, what industry you've chosen, success is about pushing through. And I don't mean that life is just a giant slog, because it's not. There's great things that happen. But resilience is when I get knocked down, I stand up. And I get knocked down, I stand up again. And if I'm getting knocked down too much, I'm probably in the wrong place. But the resilience is my personal fortitude, and that gets back to what I mentioned a moment ago, which is if I know who I am, if I have a sense of my true north and I'm living up to that, then I'll be resilient. As a father, I hope that for my children. As a member of the community, I hope that for the community, and I hope all our students are resilient. Because if you are, whether you're a straight C student or a straight A student, you'll succeed because you'll find ways to push through wherever you are, whatever challenge is in front of you. Resilience is the key.
Last question.
Last question. Are you able to expand upon any of the changes that we can see coming to the Feliciano School business?
So the final question is this notion of what we can expect for changes. And there are actually lots of great changes. We've been very fortunate to get some financial support from key donors, and we're using that to do things that provide you a benefit. Some of those include, in the next little while, I'm going to be employing essentially a communications pitch coach. That's someone who's going to help each of you find ways to be better at telling a story. You know, the elevator speech, whatever it happens to be, that's a learned skill, and we're going to bring people on with expertise in that. We've also got resources that are going to help students compete. I mentioned before, we want you to be in competitions, and we're going to help fund that. We're also bringing on a range of new programs and initiatives that will have things that you can't have imagined that are going to be part of the experience here at the Feliciano School of Business. So you'll see new programs. We've brought lots of new people, lots of new faculty and staff who are really going to enhance what we do. And all of it's directed at the end of the day to a single cause. And the single cause is you as a student. That's our business. Yes, we work here. You might have a look around and notice I've got a pretty cool office. I have a great job. I love what I do. But the whole purpose we're here is to provide an educational experience for you as our students. Without students, we're about as meaningless as they get. So all our new initiatives directly tie to what we believe are the best interest of our undergraduate and graduate students.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on Instagram Live. Thank you for your questions, and we will see you soon.
Thanks very much.